Hey, BAC here. Today we're going to talk about something that is actually a very large misconception in the gun industry and is kind of like the modern FUD lore, something like that. And it legitimately has the ability to get you, wait for it, killed in the streets with a Z. That's not clickbait or satire. There's no need to keep you in suspense because, well, the title already spoiled it, but Binda naming concept, Biden naming concept? No, Binda naming concept, also known as occluded shooting, and that's probably a more accurate way of putting it, but I'll probably just be calling it BAC, binding naming concept, for short. It has a very real possibility of causing phantom misses, and is a big reason why a lot of people might have issues with scopes. Before getting any further, it's really important to understand BAC. For starters, it absolutely has a very useful place in your toolkit, especially with fixed power optics. BAC makes a lot of sense in point blank or even closer than that, like CQB ranges, so 7 yards and in, where you're basically not doing much more than point shooting and slight correction. The issue, however, is a lot of people either don't understand what BAC is and misattribute something to be BAC, thus spreading misinformation, or they don't understand the limitations of BAC, or probably both. And it works really well when you're in your bedroom dressing up as a LARP operator, when you slow clear the house in full kit, generally after 1 or 2 old fashions. And yeah, I know you do it, I do it too. But before getting into BAC, I'm going to explain baseline shooting, because a lot of people don't actually put thought into it. Neither did I until recently. We're going to use a red dot, but the exact same thing is apparent with a scope. You bring up the optic, and you have your eye, we're going to call the main eye, behind the optic, and you see through it, you see your reticle, and you see your image. This is actually what you're going to generally do with most long-range shots, as you're going to be ignoring your other eye, regardless of if you have that other eye open or closed. Speaking of which, let's open that other eye now. Now you have both eyes open. You have what I'm calling the main eye behind the optic and the off eye, which is not behind the optic. At this point, it's very important to understand that this is not the same as your dominant and non-dominant eye. And for the first part of this video, I'm going to assume your dominant eye is behind the optic and your non-dominant eye is off of the optic, the other eye. This is not always true, but we're going to assume that for now. Because the human brain is sometimes, rarely, actually really good at what it does, it will take the information gained by that off eye and overlay it over what your dominant eye sees. Thus, instead of seeing a tube and your reticle, you actually see your reticle, the image beyond the reticle, and then images around the reticle that you wouldn't otherwise see created by your off eye, creating a somewhat seamless image. This is known as both eyes open shooting. This is not BAC aiming. So what is BAC aiming or shooting? Well, the aim point here is actually a really good way to demonstrate this, because they literally incorporated BAC into a red dot design. You can close the front cover here, which is completely occluded, and you can close the rear cover. Actually, you don't need to close the rear cover, but you can close the rear cover, which is not occluded. You can see through it. Now, when we bring up the optic, and only talking about the main eye, we just see black and a dot in darkness, right? We open our off eye and we see what we always normally would see with said off eye. But here's where the magic happens. Your brain realizes that near zero information is being done by your main eye, right? Because you're focused on a target, something away from you. Your head will actually flip the dominance of your eye. Your off eye now takes over and provides the main baseline image, and the useful bits from your now off eye, which is behind the optic, right, gets overlaid to create an image. Since the dot is the only useful thing your brain sees, or the reticle, right, sees from the formerly main eye, that gets overlaid on your other image. So you get a somewhat floating reticle effect over a apparently very crisp image. Thus, as the name implies, we get occluded shooting, also known as BAC. You can demo this concept right now as you watch this video, or if you're on the toilet or at work. Close one of your eyes, put your hand in front of it. preferably over your dominant eye. If you focus on it, you can see your hand. That information is still there. But as soon as you focus past it, your brain relegates that information as useless and blurs your hand out of the way. Simple stuff. You guys all know this. This is intuitive as a human being, which I think most of you should be human beings, I think. Right? It's not like your eye isn't seeing this information, it's just choosing to ignore it. Now here's the fancy thing. You don't actually need to close the cap on an aim point to force BAC to occur. With a red dot, it's ridiculously hard because, well, you're getting full information and your brain will generally not allow you to do things like that. However, if you take something like an ACOG or any fixed magnified optic and you go into close quarters or even medium ranges, so sub 50 yards, something similar will occur because the resolved image of the 4x optic at, say, 10 yards CQB range is so zoomed in and blurry as to be useless. The brain does the same thing as we talked about earlier, and it will basically ignore that eye and switch your dominance to your other eye. Okay, so that's all done. We understand what BAC is. Why is it useful? Well, no shit. It gives you basically a red dot style thing at closer ranges when you can engage BAC, right? In ACOG, if you've ever done house clearing with ACOG, try closing your eyes for once and only look through the ACOG. You can't see shit, right? So this gives you an option beyond just point shooting in a close environment. With the aim point, in theory, it allows you to set the brightness of the dot to the blacked out tube, which is a constant, so you never need to adjust brightness. Thus, when you come up on target, out of your patrol car, the dot is always at a correct brightness level. But why is this bad? Well, as you've imagined or figured out, your eyes are not in the same place, and the dot is a very specific image tailored to the eye behind the optic. When you overlay that onto a different image, right, your other eye is actually technically a different image that your brain resolves together through voodoo magic that I don't understand, you actually are overlaying a dot on the incorrect image. Thus, you should get an offset in theory. Low. Right there. Do you have the pen? So this is our center line. I could have pulled the shot. I didn't really try very hard. So what do we call this? 0? Z?
All right, brass facts here. You can't afford better tape.
Yeah, good enough. All right, we start at like 7 yards.
Cool.
Dude, that pizza is fucking me up.
Could not finish it, to be honest.
Oh god, I'm having trouble. There we go. Yeah, it wasn't too bad actually. So dead on. This is our center line approximately. So slightly left. So double. I'm going to do a second shot there to be sure. Okay, so same spot. We just academically go to 20 and miss the target.
It looks like that's what's going to happen if you go any further.
Let's go to 20 yards and miss the target for the record. That was way off, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a miss. One more.
It's shooting left edge though.
Yeah, that's left edge. So if I hold 3/4, I'm going to hold 3/4. 3/4 left. That's a miss. 3/4 right. That's a hit. It demos it. You got to be on the money for a human-sized target. And this is basically point blank range.
Like, it's not CQB like in a house, but it's also not far. And then for the record, I guess, let's go for a headshot. Yeah, that's on dead nuts.
Alright, as you can see, there is an offset that ranges from barely noticeable to seriously bad. Now I'm going to address a comment before it happens, because it will happen. Minute of man is not an excuse. This is technically still borderline minute of man, but that is not acceptable. Not only should we not hold ourselves to minute of man a bit standards at 10 to 25 yards, right? There's a difference between minute of man at 800 and minute of man at point blank ranges, right? That is a really poor standard to hold yourself to, but it goes beyond that. Because the reality is, most humans that I'm aware of generally view being shot at as somewhat bad. And they will typically do things like take cover, shoot you from said cover, try not to die, the usual. At this point, they go from a minute of man-sized target to potentially something like a 6-inch or smaller exposed surface that you now must engage. That's also engaging back. This is a far larger accuracy requirement than minute of man. Or you're engaging a target, maybe he is minute of man, but he's hopped up on whatever, I don't know. And you need a showstopper fight, and you need a showstopper shot, T-zone. Or what if you are a police officer and you're taking a low percentage shot? Maybe you're shooting through an opening, right? Someone revealed themselves, or perhaps you're shooting a hostage shot. Do you really want to deal with an offset on top of your 0 and height over bore when you're taking the shot? No, you don't. Absolutely not. There is no reason to. Or what if, novel concept, I know, right? You're not the perfect shot in this scenario, and instead of center punching, you're off to the right or to the left because, you're in a gunfight. Minute of man only really works here if you're centered-ish, right? And as soon as you start deviating, you're going to miss shots that you otherwise wouldn't have had. You can do better than minute of man. But even beyond that, the shortfalls of BAC go beyond that. Here's the thing. It's actually way easier than you think to accidentally do BAC when you didn't mean to. Remember that assertion I made at the start of this video. I made the assumption that your dominant eye is the one behind the scope and your off eye is, well, your non-dominant eye. But what if we flip that, right? So you're a right-handed shooter, but you're left eye dominant. This is a thing with a lot more people than... This is a thing that is a thing with a lot more people than... This is a thing that is a thing with a lot more people than most people care to admit. Wow, that sentence was awful. In this scenario of flip eye dominance, sure, it kind of works with a red dot. But if you use any kind of scope, even a 1x LPVO, which is not ever a perfect image, it is really easy under duress or just even stress from a basic drill to click and begin to slowly transition your eye dominance, especially if your eye dominance is close or completely flipped, such that you are actually partially or fully occluded shooting, right? Because you're focusing so hard on the target, your brain actually flips it over and you don't even realize it's happening because, you're busy shooting. This is especially prevalent, I've noticed, in low light situations as the scope image degrades, especially with scopes, or even magnified optics at around 40 yards where the image is still quite, mismatched from your other eye. I've done back when I did a lot of training other people, right, getting them into shooting, I would occasionally see this with people that had very strong eye dominance, and the flippage, is flippage a word? Yeah, the flippage of eye dominance that would cause them to miss was actually not incredibly uncommon. And then I would put my hand in front of their other eye and they'd start hitting in, and then you realize, oh, they're back shooting by accident. This is why, and you guys are going to laugh about this considering the memes about me being a left-handed shooter, but I'm actually right-handed. Yeah, I play tennis right-handed. I kick, like soccer balls right-handed. My right arm is stronger. I prefer my right arm for most things. I do right left-handed, but everything else I do is right-handed. Except I am left eye dominant. I even competed Olympic-style shooting where you intentionally block out one of your eyes as a righty for a short amount of time. However, being left-eye dominant, and actually majorly so, I eventually made the switch to become a left-handed shooter. Because to me, shooting isn't inherently handedness. It's not like tennis where one hand does way more work than the other, or something like that, right? I also, swing baseball bats right-handed. To me, shooting is just like, it's a both-handed task, right? If anything, your non-dominant arm is doing a lot more work physically than your left hand, or, well, your offhand. It's the same way to me that shooting a bow makes sense to shoot with whatever your eye is correctly configured for. So I made the swap to a left-handed shooter. Yes, I intentionally became crippled. There are other situations, actually, where occluded shooting will raw dog you without a second thought. Like under night vision. I've heard and seen personally, and I've done it myself, where people have their holosun in front of them, and they're trying to passive aim through their holosun with either like a pistol especially, or even a rifle setup with duals on, where they'll think the holosun is actually just crisp as hell under night vision, but they don't realize what's going on. Because the image quality through a holosun under passive aiming is so poopy, their brain actually swaps to the other tube and they swap eye dominance temporarily, and they get the floating dot effect and they're like, wow, this looks amazing. Now this is especially an issue with night vision goggles because the floating dot effect is actually also present if you do everything right, so it's much harder to realize when this has occurred. And you even see this with long range shooters or whatever, I'll actually close my other eye for a second to force my brain to really focus on that, the main eye. Alright, I think that about covers it. So is BAC dumb as fuck? Yes. No, it's got some usage, right? Like I said, point blank shooting with a magnified optic. It's good. And you also... that's actually about it. Especially the aim point concept where you intentionally occlude a 1x optic. I'm not sure how there hasn't been a bad shoot/lawsuit yet when a cop completely whiffs a shot at like 30 yards. I don't know. They're probably smart enough to not close that cap. Anyways, I hope this was interesting to you. Let me know your thoughts below because I think this should be a spicy one. I'm not really sure. Regardless, consider heading over to Subscribestar and being my sugar daddy. I mean, yes, gun content is expensive, and as you know, it's in a lot of ways feels like a fleeting thing on YouTube that will eventually collapse. So I'm trying to do as much as I can now. So it's really only for people that have spare money and want to give back a little.